Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
I would like you all to give a warm welcome to our main speaker, Kay.
Thanks, Dusty. My name is Kay, and I'm an alcoholic. I first want to thank Lila for asking me to speak, but what's really special about, to me, this meeting here in Westchester is that the entire time I've been sober, I've not been to a meeting in Westchester, and this is sort of the scene of the crime for me.
God, what a great guy. He was so funny.
My alcoholism started here, and I sort of stopped it here. Well, I didn't stop it here, but you know how that goes. I mean, it just sort of ended here a day at a time, way back. And I just, there's so many memories on this street right out here, and Westchester High School. Is there anybody in here that went to Westchester High School? Okay. Well, so did I. And I wasn't coherent through a lot of my Westchester High, and the funny thing is, it's such a nice place, but I hated Westchester when I was a child. Interestingly, I was at Thanksgiving, I went to visit my parents who have moved up to Sacramento. And my stepbrother had made for my mother and stepfather's 35th wedding anniversary this videotape, and he had taken still photographs and put music to it, and to kind of show the family history over the years. And we were watching it. It was about a 40-minute long video, and I was watching this video, and what I saw was this happy family. And I saw everybody paying attention and being responsive to one another. And I thought, where was I? Do you know what I'm saying? And what I realized was, as I have always remembered my childhood, I've always remembered it as very bleak. But there it was. I'm watching this video, and it was happy. I wasn't, but it was. And I sort of wasn't, I don't know where I was, but when I was watching this video, I kind of got choked up because I thought, boy, the disease of alcoholism was working and brewing even then. Because I wasn't a part of what was happening. It wasn't good enough, or it was boring, you know. I mean, I don't know what I thought was so boring, but I was bored. And I was anxious, and my mother was married to a guy who she divorced when I was about 4 years old, and it made me a little angry because my dad was a lot of fun. My father was an alcoholic, I guess. I really don't know. He managed to make it till he was 72, so maybe he wasn't an alcoholic. I really don't know, but he drank a lot. And my early childhood memories of him, he was cute. My dad he had his hair slicked back, and he always had he had a Chevy convertible. I remember he had a 1954 Chevrolet convertible, and like I said, he had his hair slicked back, and he always smoked menthol cigarettes, and he always drank bourbon. And in those days, you didn't have to have seatbelts on your children, I guess, because I remember Monday was Dad Day. He had visitation rights, and he would come and pick us up, and I would stand up in the seat next to him with my arm around him, and he'd have his bourbon and his cigarette, and I looked at him and thought, boy, he's terrific. And he would always, my father had an obsession for large busted manicurists that usually worked in Hawthorne. And Monday, he would pick me up after school, elementary school, and we'd go down to Hawthorne to meet one of his babes. And he would always say, honey, I'm just going to go into this bar here. Well, I'll just be a few minutes. And to this day, when someone says to me, I'll just be a few minutes, I get tense. You know? But because we would be there all afternoon and all night. And my dad was the kind of guy who knew everybody. And, hi, Chet, how you doing? And he'd buy drinks for everybody. But I thought he was the greatest. And I'd sit there with my Shirley Temples, and I'd look up at him and think, you know, you're where it's at. And then he'd take me back home, and I went back to my waspy sort of existence in Westchester. And though my family, like I said, seeing this video, it makes it sort of hard to tell it the way I used to, because, like I said, I realized that it wasn't them. And it's not that my entire life here in Alcoholics Anonymous, I have not been blaming them, because I realized I don't know what I would have done if I had a child like me. I was impossible. I was incorrigible. And I had 3 brothers, and they were good kids. And I was the bad child of the family, and I acted out. And we used to have sort of strange chores. I remember my stepfather used to have us pick up lint off the backyard lawn, which, in fact, I think there was a photograph where I was washing the stucco. I mean, but I think what his point was, in fact, I'm sure it was to get us to understand discipline and, get into action. And, but I always thought I didn't have to play by the rules. Maybe you do, but I don't. And I was really stubborn, and I didn't do it. And so I was always in trouble. I was always in trouble. I spent years in a particular punishment that we had. And what it was, my parents developed this punishment called the white chair. And what it was is a white chair that was in the corner of my bedroom, and I would have to sit there for hours. And I imagine I was supposed to think about how I was going to improve my behavior quite soon. But I would sit in this white chair, and we're very resourceful alcoholics. And what I did is I learned early on I better entertain myself, because I'm here for the duration, usually of the afternoon. And in those days, we used to have things with plastic toys would come in cold cereal boxes. Maybe they still do, I don't know. But they used to have these frogmen, these plastic frogmen. You'd take the metal cap off and put baking soda, and they'd go to the top. And I realized that the red frogman, the one who had his little knife extended as if he were going to be cutting kelp, worked really well for me, because I would take this red frogman on the white chair and I would tap it, and I could self-hypnotize myself for hours. And I was totally in a world of my own. And it got to the point, I remember my mother was becoming concerned, because they'd say, "Where's Kay?" "I don't know. She's on the white chair." "Well, did you send her?" "No." And I was going there for recreation, because it became my refuge, was to be on the white chair. And when I tell you that I spent years in that situation, I did. But as you said, we have a really wonderful way of being phony. You didn't say it quite like that, but that we have this image that we can project, and no one knew. That's why I think the disease of alcoholism, at least for me, was so lonely, because it was such a double life. On the outside, I kept everything together as best I could, but inside, I knew I was weird. I was terrified at how weird I was, and God forbid you knew how strange I was inside. And so, when I finally made it to Westchester High School, years of this tapping the frogman, you know what I'm saying? I was pretty out of touch. I was very out of touch. And it was the 60s, and the 60s at best were not a wonderful fashion period. I don't think, anyway. And we used to rat our hair out a lot. And I became, for about a year, this lowrider sort of person. And my hair was very ratted up, and I never combed the back of my hair, which was another one of my philosophies. Why comb the back? I was only concerned about walking towards you. Once I had left, it really didn't matter to me. So I was sort of like a false front in a movie lot. It was just a front. But what happened is I developed this knot from not brushing it out in the back of my hair that was like it was huge. And it was this knot of hair in the back of my head. And I remember sitting at assemblies, and I remember right over here, just right down the street. I hated this place. Anyway, it was right down the street. But I remember sitting in assemblies, and people would say, "What is that on the back of her head?" And I was mortified, but it never crossed my mind that all I had to do was get rid of it. It never crossed my mind. So I would be there, I'd be mortified, I'd be in such agony, I'd be in such pain. Oh my God, listen to them talk, but I never got rid of it. And I could have, and I didn't. I would have a rip in my blouse, and rather than fix it, I would keep my arm in front of it all day long in discomfort, because it never occurred to me that you could do anything about your existence. You find that out later, that there are actions you can take, but I never understood action. I only understood comprehension through a sick mind, and worry and figuring it out. I'm always going to figure it out. Well, if I do this, maybe this will happen. I was exhausted by the time I got here of trying to figure it out. And everything was in my head. Nothing was real. And And yet inside, I was still sort of this tomboy kid, but I looked like a slut, and so I was attracting the druggies. I mean, but I was I'm convinced I was the only virgin at Westchester High by the time I graduated, but I didn't look the part. My insides were not matching my outsides. I looked rough, and so I attracted a rough group of guys, and what we would do is drive up and down Manchester Boulevard right here, down to the Playa and back up to Westchester, and usually a lowered 48 Oldsmobile with a gold metal flake top, smoking dope, taking downers, taking bennies, and everything else we could get our hands on, because that's kind of what you did in the 60s, you took drugs. For some reason, I never fell in love with drugs, though. I'm a wino, and that's what I fell in love with. I had my first drink when I was 18 years old because one of my boyfriends told me point blank. He said, Kay, I want you to impress my friends at my party. I said, gee, I'm sorry, I don't do that. I said, I'm sort of shy, I'm introverted. I don't do that. He said, well, I need you to do that tonight. He said, look, why don't you have a couple of drinks? And the truth is, I knew we had a lot of alcoholics in our family, and I thought, no, I don't want to drink. And I didn't like it anyway. Someone had given me some beer once, and I hated the stuff. I just hated alcohol. But he said, look, I've got something that I think you'll like. It's called Right Time, and it's a carbonated malt liquor wine. And I held my nose, and I gagged down the first bottle, and I held my nose, and I gagged down the second bottle of the stuff. And when I tell you that I did not draw a sober breath until I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm not kidding. It's funny, the other day I went to the eye doctor, and I went because I've been having really severe bloodshot eyes, I mean really bad. And I went to the eye doctor, and I've been going to this guy since 1977. And he said to me, I've been telling you, and I've been telling you since you came here, that you abuse Visine. And he said, do you know how many times we've had this conversation? And I said, no. And he said, I can document it. And he showed me how every time I'd swear off Visine. And he said, you just used up your lifetime supply early. And that's sort of how everything was for me. I used up my lifetime smoking supply early. I used up my lifetime wine supply by the time I was 23 years old. And like I said, I did not draw a sober breath until I got to AA. And how does one do that? I don't know. All I know is that it felt good, and I thought, I didn't need to use the frogman much once I had the wine. But I was a real... It's funny, the other day I was thinking about this apartment that I had in Palms. I don't remember much about living there, but this place was such a filthy tenement, and I was like 19. I had only been drinking a year, and I was already living in this tenement building. And why is because all I cared about was getting drunk. All I cared about prior to getting drunk was being out of it. So by the time drinking got into my bloodstream, all I cared about was being drunk. It's all I knew, and it's all I wanted to know. But I was living in this apartment in Palms, and I never did the dishes, and of course I just had pots and pans that would grow ferns, in the corner. And I remember I could never let anybody come into my house because it was filthy. And by this time I'd gotten rid of the knot. It finally grew out, eventually it's going to go. But I remember I lived like an animal. And I remember to go, for example, a big night for me was to go to Jack in the Box. And I was terrified to go to Jack in the Box, and I was intimidated to go to Jack in the Box. And I would go in full makeup to go to Jack in the Box. No matter how drunk I was, I would stop and put on a full, whatever it was that I was wearing makeup-wise, get myself as dressed up as I could to drive down to Manchester to the Jack in the Box. And if I could do that, that was a good night for me. If I could get myself out of the house and get to Jack in the Box. I don't believe I was acrophobic, but I was pretty close to it, I guess, because I was in terror and fear. In fact, I remember I had smoked one night this friend of mine said, look, let's go smoke some hashish. And we did. And it was that sort of wet kind that had opium in it, I guess, or I don't know what it had in it, but it was something else. And we went to this movie in Westwood to see a movie called Freaks, which by itself is a very upsetting film. In fact, it was banned, I guess, in 1933 for 50 years because it was terribly disturbing. We walked into the theater, and I had smoked this hash, and I sat down, and I started screaming at the top of my lungs. And he got it, my boyfriend got it early on in our relationship, that once I started screaming, there was not a large window for let's leave. It was now. We're going, and we're going now. And so he took me to my house at the time, it was in Inglewood, and ladled vodka gimlets down me, basically for 3 days. I was just... freaked out, and that never went away. That kind of fear and terror from that first major anxiety attack never went away. And it would happen in all sorts of situations. I would go to Vaughn's Market, and I knew, you begin to, when you live like that, at least when I was living like that, I knew my limitations. I knew that I couldn't do much. I knew that my world had gotten very, very small, and I knew I had to learn to cope and live and adjust in it. And so I knew that when I went to the grocery market, you better not fill your cart up too much because you're going to leave soon, and you don't know when that's going to hit you. So I would have to buy a few items at a time, because like I said, life got real small for me. I would call, in essence, going out to buy supplies, and supplies in the end for me was a half gallon, because it was only $1.98 of Gallo Rheingarten. I can taste it like it was yesterday. Pack of cigarettes, maybe if I was feeling charitable, a can of cat food for my cat, maybe. I came first, and this was how I lived, and I didn't want to change it. I didn't know you could change it. I didn't know why you'd want to change it. It was just, this is how I thought life was. So I went to St. John's, and I went to therapy, thinking that maybe they could do something for me, and she gave me all the one-liners. She said, well, Kay, you don't feel a part of, you're this, you're all these things. And I said, I knew. I said, what do I do about it? And she said, I don't know, sweetheart. She said, I'm not a mechanic. I said, fine. And I had been going to her for like 3 years, and she's a friend of mine today, but in those days, I don't think people, well, they didn't know as much. Now they know a lot, but in those days they didn't. And she said to me, I'm not a mechanic, and she never asked me how much I drank. So I said, do you want to know how much I drink?
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
And she said, all right, how much do you drink? And I said, I drink a gallon of wine a day, every day. And I've been doing this for 5 years. I said, I drink all the time. And she said, well, it sounds to me like you may have an addiction to alcohol. I'll see you next week, we're out of time, And I got in my car, and I had my little Gallo and between my knees. And for some hideous mishap of nature, my stepfather had bought me a Dodge Challenger with a 440 Magnum engine, which idled at like 45. Do you know what I'm saying? And I'm driving this car. I look back now. I don't know about you. It is just beyond me that I didn't hurt someone. I mean, it's just beyond me. But I had my little wine bottle, and I was going to Santa Monica Junior College because I was really good at starting things. But once you have to start working for it, I lost interest. I don't know about you. I liked the end result, but if you had to work for it, it bored me. There's that thing again. I was bored again. But I was starting Santa Monica Junior College for the umpteenth time. And on my way to this evening, I had uttered something that I'm sure you've heard if you've been around here a while, 1,000,000 times from the podiums of Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, God help me. And it was a passing throwaway line, probably as I was putting in my cigarette lighter, nothing more than that. But I believe for us that that's all you have to do. And I'll tell you, I've been telling this story for many, many years, but I always get emotional right at this place. Because I'm very aware that I haven't done much on this program except be willing. And I heard the other night a girl say in a meeting that willingness is not an emotion, willingness is an action. And that's all that I've ever been on this program is willing. Everything else has landed in my path. There for me to take it if I want it. There for me to avail myself of it if I decide to use it. And there it was. And I was getting out of my car at the same time as this skinny redhead with this Hell's Angel jacket was getting out of her car. She looked like a bum, so did I. But anyway, for some reason, I went up to her rather than anybody else in the parking lot, and I said, do you mind, can you show me how to get to my class? I'm sort of drunk, and I don't know. Sure. We got to talking. We're walking through the campus. She's going to take me to my classroom, and she said, what class are you taking? And I told her whatever it was, and I said, what class are you taking? She said, oh, I'm not taking a class. She said, I'm here tonight to give a lecture on alcoholism and drug abuse. And I said, for it or against it? I sort of couldn't understand the topic, the subject matter. And she could tell that I was very interested in what she was talking about. And she said, why are you so interested? And I said, well, I think maybe I better go on the wagon. And she laughed, and she said, in AA, for those of us in Alcoholics Anonymous, it doesn't mean much when you go on the wagon. It just means you're pretty much going to fall right back off. And this was October the 1st, 1974. And like I said, I was about 22, 23. I think at first I was 22. But she took my phone number and she took me to a Friday night meeting. And it was Overland, some Culver City meeting in Overland. Big, bright room. And I don't know about you, but if you're accustomed to dim lighting, and I hadn't been in bright lights for a long time. And I was not fond of this, I wasn't fond of this at all. And this meeting, I don't know if this was true or not, but my perception was it was the brightest room I had ever been in my life. You know what I'm saying? And I said, June, I have one problem. You see, I flip out in meetings. I have anxiety attacks. I know what you're saying, that you go to meetings and stuff, but I can't do this. And she said, come on, just do it. And she gave me a Snickers bar, and she put a lot of honey and sugar in my tea because I was beginning to get a little edgy. The wine, the lack of it, I was beginning to feel that. And I was sitting in this meeting, and the woman, of course, was this big blonde from Texas who talked about how she no longer had anxiety attacks. And I realized early on, well, I didn't realize anything early on, that's not true. I was just sort of numb, but I was beginning to take this all in, and still wasn't willing to work for it. But I remember when I was new, there was a big AA convention in San Diego, the big, I guess it was the big Southern California convention. It was like 2 weeks after I had met June. And she took me down there, and I didn't realize that she had gone to the main speaker and told him that she had a newcomer that she would like him to go say hello to. So the main speaker was Chuck C. And Chuck was standing there at the podium, and it wasn't just my perception. There were 7,000 alcoholics in this hall in San Diego. And Chuck had that full head of white hair, and the light was, and he had this glow around his head, and he was, you know how he used to talk the tongue-chewing babble, and you know how he would do that, and do what God's kids think needs to get done. He would say all of his things, you know. And he came up to me after he was through speaking, after his people, and he said, "Hi, you're Kay and you're new, aren't you?" And I thought, oh my God, this place is really something, you know. I thought these people are so spiritual, and I was very smitten with AA. And I say that because it was new, it was exciting. I must admit I liked the attention when I raised my hand and people come up to you when you're new and hi, and they give you a lot of attention. It had been a long time. But I had this problem, you know, I just wasn't willing to work for anything. You know, I wanted it in my hands, and I got bored if I had to work for it, you know, so there I was again. And yet I wore the largest Serenity Prayer necklace you've ever seen in your life around my neck. And I used a 12-step, I had an alcoholic aunt who used to come over to our house, my Aunt Ellen, and she was bombed constantly. And she was someone I could look at and say, boy, if I keep drinking, I'm going to be like her, because she was bad then. But I would slip, and I would slip because I would take a codeine pill when there was no pain involved and nobody was, you know, I had some dental surgery, and my sponsor was doling it out, and I managed to sneak one and hide it for future reference, do you know what I'm saying? Then I worked in the rock and roll business. We designed album covers, and we were seeing Linda Ronstadt and people like that, and I thought, well, you know, if you're in insurance, you cannot use drugs and smoke dope, but I mean, if you're in rock and roll, you have to. So I would start smoking a little roach now and then, and I did this for about a year, where I just kept slipping. And I kept coming back, and I'd smirk a little bit, and they'd say, did you slip? I'd say, yeah, I did it again, and it was just sort of a game to me. But, you know, there's an old saying that's very true in this program, and that is that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And I was at this pool party, and there was this Nazi general AA member sitting across from me, and she said, I hear you slipped again, Kay. And I said, yeah, I did. You know. And she said, you know, I want you to tell me, how do you feel when you're out there? And I thought, oh my God, I was sort of embarrassed because I had this audience, and I thought, what does she want to hear? So I gave her every one-liner I could think of. I said, well, I don't feel a part of, I feel less than, don't feel a part of this wonderful thing, and I just kept saying all this stuff just to get her off my back. And she stopped me. She kind of grabbed me by the collar, and she pulled me towards her. She goes, you know what I don't hear? Because I don't hear the word lonely. Do you feel lonely out there, Kay? And it was as if she took a gun and she shot me, because I just started to sob. And for some reason, I guess I was ready. I don't know. But she said, it's action. Action is the key to this program. Prior to coming here, my stepfather would say things to me like, gee, Kay, if you only felt better about yourself, you would do better. And of course, AA takes a completely different view. In AA, it's if you do better, then you will feel better. And it was all about action. It was all about changing, in my book, everything that I thought was right and everything that I thought made sense. It was turn it around. because it's not your way of doing things. You want people to like you, you put yourself out to them. You go to meetings and you become a greeter, you shake hands. We used to go to 26 and Broadway, and I would go to her, and maybe I was interested in someone who wasn't paying me attention. I'd start complaining to her, and she'd say, go in the kitchen and wash cups. When we had cups, right? And I would go in the kitchen, and I'd think, now how in the hell is this supposed to be helping me? This is not solving my problem. And I'm angry, and I'm washing these cups, and I'm doing it. And before you know it, I'm talking to somebody in the kitchen, and we're just living in the now about whatever's going on. And a whole new world opened up to me that I believe when I started playing with that frog man, I lost it. But it was like starting, my entire adult life has been in AA. I have a great deal of love and respect for AA. There have been a lot of ups and downs in my sobriety. There have been a lot of changes, but the only thing that has never changed to me are the principles of AA. The meetings can change. Where you have the meetings can change. The people can change. But the principles in 18 and a half years have never changed. They have never changed. And it's the only thing that remains constant in my life. And it's funny, the other day at work, there's this woman who's from India that we just hired recently. And she goes, okay, Kay, where are you going to go tonight? And I said, I'm going to go to an AA meeting. And she said, what for? Why are you in AA? And I said, well, I'm an alcoholic. And she said, when did you quit? And I said, when I was 22, 23. And she goes, well, don't you think that perhaps you were kind of got wild as a teenager and it kind of overlapped into your early 20s? She goes, don't you think that perhaps you've overdone this thing? And for a split second, it's like, well, maybe. I don't know, but it's that close. It is right under the skin. I don't kid myself that I can be talking to my baby tonight on the phone, giving her wonderful words of wisdom, and tomorrow, if I don't remember that I'm an alcoholic and that I can't do this, I can be drunk. It's just like that. I have seen people that I never thought would get drunk on this program. And isn't it funny if you've ever known someone that's got drunk? Have you noticed how their life never really improves? Have you noticed that? Have you ever met one person? There was one girl that I knew who for 4 years she had lasted out there. And I wasn't envious of her position, but I was just amazed at how she was functioning in a career. She was getting rich, and all this stuff was happening. I see her in a Mercedes, and I think, what's going on with this woman? And I heard recently from a friend that she is dying to get back, and she just can't do it. She cannot bring herself back into these rooms because my ego will kill me. I know that. I'm not embarrassed to say that any given day, sometimes my ego has kept me here. Fine, whatever it takes. My ego has kept me here because I don't know how I'd be if I made a mistake and I'd have to come back. I know someone who has done that, and they're not being honest about their sobriety, and they're not very happy. And I know that sometimes the only thing that I do have is my sobriety being clean. And it is enough. When I was about 4.5 years sober, I got married, if you will, and I got into a relationship that was wonderful. It was full of everything that I wanted. It was full of children and family that I didn't really have myself. And it was prestigious, and we were rich, and it was wonderful. And I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. It was some of the best years of my life because I grew up a lot in this particular relationship. But things do change. Sometimes in sobriety, the news is good, and sometimes the news is not good. And I remember when I was newer and I'd hear people go through things in sobriety, and we're thinking, oh, God, don't make me have to go through that. I don't want to have to go through that. And I remember one night I was sitting in a meeting, and I heard this girl talking about something she was going through, and I thought, gee, my sobriety's been kind of cushy. I had thought up to that point. Well, never say that. Don't ever say that. Don't ever say that. And all hell broke loose, and a lot of things happened that were very earth-shattering to me, very earth-shattering. And I had to leave this particular relationship, and I had to leave it due to my principles. There's good news and bad news. The good news is that you will develop principles here in AA because of AA. The bad news is you may have to live by them. And sometimes that's hard, because I don't know about you, but if I can do it the easier, softer way, I'd rather. I don't like pain. I never have. I don't like it now any more than I used to. But, I did what June told me to do when I had 2 weeks of sobriety. It worked at 16 years of sobriety. And what it was is I called people, and I just didn't drink no matter what. And it wasn't that I wanted to drink. It's that I thought the pain was so overwhelming I would just have to. And I remember 2 years ago at Christmas, I remember lying on my floor of this new little house, and And, I know it was a material thing, but I came from a house that had 5,000 square feet into a house that maybe had 500. I don't know, very, very small. And but it was change, and everything had changed almost overnight. And I'm not good with change, and it was a shock. But anyway, I was laying in the fetal position on the floor of my room, and it's Christmas Eve, and I'm looking at my poodle, and I'm thinking, why do I have to go through this at 16? And I thought, well, where does it say? Where does it say that you don't have to live life here? What it says is you will be alert and that you will be able to have a life here. And sometimes that life includes things, like I said, that maybe not your choice, maybe not the way it happens is not your choice. But I was laying in this position, and I was in such pain, and I called Julie C. And I said, Julie, let me ask you a question. I said, am I ever going to be okay again? She goes, do you mean, are you ever going to be the way you were again? And I said, yes. She said, no. I said, all right, then let me rephrase this question. I said, am I ever going to be happy again? She said, not only will you be happy again, she goes, but you will find yourself in a situation where you will be telling the story and you will have a lot of difficulty recalling the pain. And it's been very true. And my life has taken some dramatic new turns in the past 2 years. And it's an adventure. If you've been around here, you know it's an adventure. And I've never, thank God, up to this moment in time, been under the illusion that I can do anything alone. I know I can't do anything. I know that I'm that girl on the white chair with the little red frog man, who's drinking Gallo Rhine Garden, who has projectile throw up. I know that that's me. I just hope and pray I don't forget that that's who that is. And so what I do is I try to treat my program the way I did when I was new. I used to also think that, gee, maybe when you turn 5, the answers get more sophisticated, more adult. Maybe when you turn 10, you don't have to do what you used to do. Maybe when you turn 15, it lifts. And I heard this guy once say, he said, don't ever make the mistake of thinking that time is a tool. It is not. It is nothing. Time is not a tool. And I used to get into that where I thought that was sort of like insurance policy, and it isn't. And like I said, I've seen some people that I never thought would get drunk forget. And there were people, one person who saved my life more than once, with their knowledge and their love of this program, their respect. But lest we forget, I take it very seriously. And I've had some of the people at work say to me, they think it's strange, that I take it so seriously. But it is my life. I feel that, I didn't put myself here. My behavior, my alcoholism, I got here. But I didn't seek this place out. It came to me. And I don't know how many times the gift, we're going to see it, There are people, I work, one of my clients is the city of LA. And I go to City Hall a lot. And I'm walking over people that are probably my age with brown little paper bags who live in little cardboard boxes. And I'm walking over them. And I'm not kidding myself that I could be there in a year from now. And I know that. But as I walk over them, I think, my first reaction sometimes is, oh, like, ooh, look at that. And what's the difference? The difference, like I said, maybe the only difference between them and me is I know I'm an alcoholic. This same aunt was one of those other people who I wondered, how has she gone on for so many years out there still? How has she done this? Why is she not dead? Maybe I was rash, you know what I'm saying? I don't know. But this woman, I found out about a month ago, had tried to kill herself. She had had it. She was tired of her son coming home and finding her drunk again. And she decided to hell with it. She took a bunch of pills and she drank a lot, and there she was. And my mother called me and she said, Kay, would you talk to your aunt? I said, I'd be happy to. And she was at the RFK Little Medical Center over here on Sepulveda. And I said, yeah, I'd be more than happy to. Call her, tell her I'll come talk to her. And my mom called her, and I talked to her a few days later. I said, well, what did she say? Does she want to talk to me? She said, no. She want to know what she said? I said, what? She said, tell her thanks, but I'm not an alcoholic. Not like Kay is, The difference is that Kay is sober, not because I've done anything wonderful. I've never done anything wonderful. The most wonderful thing I can do is know that I need a lot of help. And I am not embarrassed to admit the fact that I need a lot of help on a daily basis just to get through the day. I don't want to pretend that it's bleak. It isn't. My life is good today. For the most part, I live with relatively little fear. Lila said before I came, she goes, "Are you nervous?" And I thought, well, it's not any more than usual. I'm always a little nervous. I just think that's part of being an alcoholic. I don't know. I find life on life's terms a little scary, but I have the tools, and I can. I feel that with this program we can meet any challenge, and there have been deaths, and there have been joys, and sometimes I have to pray just as hard when times get good. I met someone about 6 months ago, and then my heart began to open up again, and my first reaction was, "Oh, no, you don't," and I wanted to run away from it. And I mean, God is or God isn't. And I thought, God has never, when I have always gone to my higher power, God has always, always been there for me. Never has this program failed me if I choose to be willing. And again, willingness is not a feeling, it is an action. Thanks for asking me to speak. Keep coming back.
Thank you.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.